Hello and welcome to Lesson 1, Find the Midpoint of a Line Segment. Our objectives today are to use what you already know. Use the formula for average to find midpoint. We're going to be finding midpoint on a number line as well as finding the midpoint of a line segment on a graph. So let's begin. Let's look at a number line. If, let's say, we wanted to find midpoint between any two numbers, let's say the numbers -2, so we'll circle that, and 8. Think about how would we do that. We would probably take and count this one off, count that one off, and just kind of go in evenly, almost like we were finding the median, and we would arrive at 3. But how can we do that algebraically? This is very easy if we have a number line and we have numbers on the number line, but what if we wanted to find the midpoint between -2,520 and +6,850. That would take you a long time to count off back and forth. So we have another way we can do that, and that's where the average comes into play. If I take the average between any two numbers, all I have to do is add them together, -2 plus 8, and divide by 2, and I have the average. So let's see what that gets us. -2 plus 8 is 6. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. And that's what we got. So let's create a formula for this midpoint. If we have a number line, we know that these are all x values. They're horizontal. This is the x-axis. So we could call this value x of 1, and we could call this value x of 2. So the formula for midpoint is then x of 1 plus x of 2 divided by 2. It's always going to be 2 because we're finding the midpoint between two numbers. So here we have x of 1 plus x of 2, and then divided by 2, exactly what we did. Let's apply that to a line segment on a graph. So here we have a line segment, and we want to find the midpoint. And I can mark right here that this looks like it's about the midpoint. Except for what are the coordinates of that point? If you notice, this point comes down somewhere in between two lines, and then we could probably figure it out here. But again, we don't know what the units are. We could probably figure it out, but it's very hard to estimate when you have a point that's not exactly in between two crosshairs, and this point is not. So again, we can use our midpoint formula to find the midpoint. But notice now that we don't just have x coordinates, we also have y coordinates. Because our line is not horizontal, it now has a slope. So we could do the exact same thing. We know that 8 is an x coordinate, and we could call this x1, which means then we would call -1 y1. And we could do the same thing here, but now this is now x2, and then the 5 would be y2. And it doesn't matter which ones are x1, y1, or x2, y2, as long as we keep the 1's together and the 2's together. So let's think about our midpoint formula. We said it was x2 or x1, doesn't matter. We just add our x's together and divide by 2, and that gives us the midpoint of our x coordinate. But what about y? So could we do the exact same thing? Why not? So if we can find the midpoint of our x coordinate, we can surely find the midpoint of our y coordinate by doing the same thing. So we could take y2 plus y1 divided by 2, and that would give us the midpoint of our y coordinate. And then we will know the exact location of this midpoint. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to add my x's together. So I'm going to take 8 plus a -3, be careful to keep the same signs, divided by 2. 8 plus -3 is 5, and 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So you can see that this in fact is in between 2 points. Now let's do the same thing for our y coordinate. So our y's are, and again order doesn't matter, we're just adding two numbers together. So we have 5 plus a -1 divided by 2. 5 plus -1 is 4, And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So now we know the exact location of this midpoint. The x value is 2.5, and the y value is 2. If we were to count, we can see the y value looks to be 2, and the x value does look to be 2.5. But we always need to use this equation to be sure that it was 2. It could have been 2.2 or 2.3, so we need to make sure we find the average of the coordinates in order to know for sure. And that concludes our lesson today on midpoint. So at the end of this lesson, you now know how to use the formula for average to find the midpoint, both on a number line and on a graph.